I'm Margaret Harlow, 72 years old, and for weeks I had been circling this day on my calendar like a bright promise. It was supposed to be my first real vacation in years, a trip to Costa Rica with my daughter, Elaine, her husband Thomas, and the grandchildren. I arrived at the airport 2 hours early, suitcase neatly packed, passport tucked inside my purse. I thought I was about to make memories I would carry into the quiet evenings of my later life. But the moment we reached the boarding gate, something in Elaine's eyes shifted. She held her phone in one hand, glancing at me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her voice. "Mom," she said flatly, "there's been a change. You won't be coming with us. It's complicated. Someone important is taking your place." I felt the words slice through me sharper than any knife. Around us, travelers hustled toward their flights. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves. Voices rose and fell in the noisy terminal. Yet all I could hear was the silence pressing between us. I searched Elaine's face for warmth for the daughter I had raised, but she avoided my eyes. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check the time. Even the children looked away, embarrassed by a scene they didn't fully understand. I stood there with my boarding pass in hand as though it had suddenly become useless paper. My chest tightened, my cheeks burned, and I felt smaller than I had in decades. They walked toward the gate, handed over their tickets, and without a backward glance disappeared down the jet bridge. Stranded in the middle of a crowd, I told myself not to cry, not to let the humiliation spill where strangers could see. I had raised this family, supported them quietly for years, and in a single moment I had been dismissed like excess baggage. I didn't know it yet, but standing at that gate, abandoned and humiliated, would become the moment everything shifted. The gate closed behind them with a hollow thud, and I was left staring at the frosted glass doors as if sheer will could bring them back. My hands trembled, the boarding pass still clenched between my fingers, its edges soft from the grip. A gate agent glanced at me, then quickly looked away, sensing something private unraveling in plain sight. I sank into a nearby chair, the hard plastic digging into my back. Around me, the terminal buzzed, announcements blared overhead. A child cried somewhere down the hall. Rolling suitcases clicked across the floor. The world spun on, indifferent to the fact that my family had just walked out of my life, as though I were no more than a stranger. For a few minutes, I sat frozen, replaying Elaine's words. "Someone important is taking your place." The cruelty of it knifed through me again and again. Who could possibly be more important than a mother who had carried her, raised her, and given her every chance I wanted to storm after her demand, an explanation? But my legs felt rooted. My throat burned with unshed tears. A young couple sat across from me, laughing over coffees, their easy closeness twisting the knife deeper. I wondered if they saw the abandoned old woman with her useless ticket. I folded the paper, carefully tucked it back into my purse, and forced myself to stand. I told myself to breathe, to straighten my shoulders. If I crumbled here in front of strangers, the humiliation would double. I walked slowly toward the restroom, each step heavy as lead. In the mirror's harsh light, I saw a pale, strained face staring back mine, yet older and lonelier than I remembered. I dabbed at my eyes, whispering, "Hold it together, Margaret." But inside, something fragile had cracked, and the pieces were already shifting towards something I couldn't yet name. As I left the restroom and wandered back into the terminal, memories pressed against me like waves. I had not always been this invisible woman clutching tissues in an airport. There was a time when my name carried weight, when I walked into boardrooms and people stood to greet me. Decades ago, my husband and I built a financial advisory firm from nothing but grit and long nights at the kitchen table. By the time I turned 50, we had offices in 3 cities, and our portfolio was worth more than I had ever dared to imagine in my youth. When he passed away, I kept the company running long enough to secure our legacy, then quietly stepped aside. I told everyone, including Elaine, that I had retired with modest means. What I didn't say was that I still held substantial shares investments that grew silently while I let the world think I was just another widow living carefully on a pension. I had convinced myself it was the right choice. If Elaine believed I was ordinary, maybe she would fight for her own success instead of leaning on mine. I wanted her to have pride to know her accomplishments belonged to her. But over the years, I blurred the lines between protecting her and enabling her. When she struggled with bills, I sent money quietly. When Thomas lost a job, I stepped in with a loan that was never repaid. I told myself it was just motherly support, but I see now how it twisted into dependency. Sitting there at the Terminal Cafe with a lukewarm cup of tea, I wondered if I had been the architect of my own humiliation. I had hidden my strength for so long that my daughter had begun to see me as weak, dispensable, easy to erase. The thought stung, yet beneath the sting was the beginning of something else, an ember of anger, faint but hot, waiting for air. I carried my tea back to the table but couldn't bring myself to drink it. The taste of betrayal was already too bitter. My first instinct had been to go home, draw the curtains, and let the silence swallow me. Yet as I sat in that crowded terminal watching strangers rush toward lives that mattered to them, a defiant thought rose inside me. Why should I go home in defeat? For 72 years, I had lived with resilience. I had buried a husband, weathered market crashes, and rebuilt my life more than once. Was I really going to let my own daughter reduce me to a forgotten passenger left behind at gate C-23? I pulled out my phone, my hands steadier now than they had been moments before. I scrolled to the number I hadn't dialed in years, Richard Lane, my former attorney, and the man who had guided me through every merger and estate plan. My voice barely shook when he answered. "Richard, it's Margaret. I need to see you today. Urgently." He hesitated only a moment before replying, "Of course." Chicago. Yes, Chicago. The word came out sharp like a vow. Within an hour, arrangements were made. Not for a commercial ticket, not for a standby seat, but for a private jet waiting at the far end of the tarmac. I walked past glossy shops and food stalls, past families huddled together with excitement, until a black car met me outside and carried me to a quieter hangar. The jet gleamed under the afternoon sun, sleek and unapologetic. As I climbed the narrow stairs, I felt the weight of humiliation slide off my shoulders, replaced by a steadier fire. I wasn't flying home to lick my wounds. I was flying toward a decision that would rewrite the balance of power in my family. Chicago greeted me with a cool wind that whipped against my coat as I stepped off the plane. A driver was already waiting, courtesy of Richard's office, and within minutes, I was being ushered into the marble lobby of a law firm I had not entered in over a decade. Richard Lane hadn't changed much. His hair was grayer, his frame a little heavier, but his eyes still carried that same sharp clarity I had always trusted. He rose when I walked, in his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "Margaret," he said warmly, "what brings you here with such urgency?" I sat across from him, folding my hands to keep them from trembling. "My daughter," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, "has mistaken my silence for weakness. I've supported her family for years, quietly, consistently. Today she showed me what she truly thinks of me: expendable. That ends now." Richard leaned forward, listening carefully. "What do you want me to do? I want every line of financial support cut. The monthly transfers, the credit cards, the so-called loans, everything. I want it documented that from this day forward, Elaine and Thomas will stand on their own." And Richard, I paused, letting the words settle. "I want a new trust drafted. My wealth will go to causes I believe in, not to people who see me as disposable." For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the city outside the window. Then Richard nodded. "I'll prepare the documents." When the papers were placed before me, my pen hovered just briefly. My hand trembled not from doubt, but from release. With one firm stroke of ink, I ended decades of quiet enabling. I signed not only as a mother, but as a woman, reclaiming her dignity. The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long, self-imposed sleep. I moved out of my quiet suburban house, the one that had grown too heavy with memories of my husband and too silent with loneliness. In its place, I bought a penthouse in the heart of Chicago glass walls, opening to a skyline that glittered with both promise and defiance. The first morning I woke there, the city stretched beneath me alive and unapologetic. I brewed my own coffee stronger than I usually drank and felt a surge of energy pulse through me. For the first time in years, I wasn't arranging my days around anyone else's needs. I returned to old circles I had once abandoned, investment luncheons, charitable galas, conferences, where sharp minds debated the future of markets. Walking into those rooms again, I half expected whispers. Isn't she too old? Isn't she done? But what I found instead were handshakes, invitations, and genuine respect. My reputation had outlived my absence. It was strange rediscovering myself after decades of shrinking for others. I remembered how it felt to negotiate, to stand firm, to command attention, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. At night, as I looked out over the lights of Michigan Avenue, I realized that my daughter had tried to write me off as irrelevant, and in doing so, she had reminded me who I truly was. Of course, the wound was still there. Sometimes, as I slipped off my heels and set my evening bag down, I would hear Elaine's voice in my head. Someone important is taking your place. The sting lingered, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it fueled me. I had taken back my place, and no one would ever erase me again. Elaine called me 2 weeks later, her voice sharp with panic. I had been expecting it. Mom, something's wrong with the account, she snapped. The transfer didn't come through this month. Did the bank make a mistake? I let the silence stretch before answering. No mistake, Elaine. I stopped the transfers. Her gasp was audible even through the phone. Stopped. What do you mean? Stopped. We need that money. The mortgage. Thomas's projects. Her words tangled together, frantic and disbelieving. I said nothing more, and after a long pause, she hung up. That was only the beginning. Within days, my phone lit up with messages, angry texts from Elaine, voicemails from Thomas, sounding less like a son-in-law and more like a desperate debtor. They tried the credit cards, declined. They called the bank, frozen. The safety net they hadn't realized was under them had vanished, and for the first time in years, they were standing on bare ground. I imagined the scene in their home bills stacking on the counter, children overhearing whispered arguments, Thomas pacing as Elaine demanded answers he didn't have. She had built her confidence on the illusion of independence, never knowing that I had been quietly underwriting her security. Now stripped of that illusion, she was furious not just at the missing money, but at the truth it revealed. News travels fast in families. A cousin mentioned to her that I had been seen at a downtown gala, elegantly dressed, shaking hands with executives. Elaine must have pieced it together then that I wasn't some fragile retiree with dwindling savings. I was still the woman who once built an empire, and she had underestimated me completely. Her anger turned to disbelief, then to fear. And soon enough, it would turn into something else, the need to confront me face to face. It was a rainy afternoon when the knock came at my penthouse door. I knew before I opened it who would be standing there. Elaine, hair, damp eyes blazing, her arms crossed, as though she were bracing against a storm both inside and out. "Are you enjoying yourself up here?" she demanded the moment I let her in. Her gaze swept across the polished floors, the view of the skyline, the art I had finally taken out of storage. "While we're drowning, you're—" "What playing queen of the city?" I steadied my voice. "I'm living my life, Elaine, something I've neglected for far too long." Her laugh was bitter. "Living your life, you cut us off without warning. The kids. Thomas, we depended on that support. Do you even care what this is doing to us?" I felt the sting of her words, but I did not flinch. "I care more than you realize. That's why I stopped. Because love is not supposed to make you weak. And I have made you weak, Elaine, by protecting you from every consequence." Her anger cracked, then replaced by tears, she tried to blink away. "You don't understand. I thought we were partners in this, that you wanted to help. And then, at the airport, you humiliated me. The memory of that day burned in my chest, but I met her eyes. You humiliated me, Elaine. You left me behind as though I were disposable. A mother doesn't forget that. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the rain tapping against the glass. For the first time, I saw something shift in her shame recognition, maybe even regret. I don't know how to do this without you, she whispered. You'll learn, I said softly, because respect must come before dependence, and until it does, I can't give you anything more. Elaine stayed only an hour that first day. When she left, her shoulders were slumped, her defiance dimmed. I watched her disappear into the rain-soaked street, and for the first time in years, I felt no urge to chase after her, no need to fix what she had broken. The choice was hers now. In the weeks that followed, our conversations were fewer but different. Gone were the frantic demands, the angry accusations. Instead, she asked about things she had never cared to ask before: my health, my work, even my memories of her father. There was hesitation in her voice, as though she was relearning how to speak to me without strings attached. I didn't rush the process. I answered when I wanted to, declined when I didn't. I invited her for coffee once, not at her home, where I would have been expected to bring gifts, but at a small cafe near my building. She arrived subdued, no longer the daughter who assumed my wallet was always open. We spoke quietly, awkwardly, yet for the first time in years, it felt like a real conversation between two adults. I knew there was still a long road ahead. Respect cannot be rebuilt overnight, and trust once fractured is slow to mend. But I also knew I had set a boundary that would protect us both. I was no longer her safety net, and she could no longer erase me with a single dismissive sentence. One evening, as I stood on my balcony, the city lights spread out beneath me like a constellation, I felt a strange peace. My daughter might never fully understand the pain of that day at the airport, but she was beginning to understand something more important, that love requires respect, and respect is earned, not demanded. I breathed in the cool night air and let the truth settle over me. I had not lost my place. I had reclaimed it. A month later, I found myself standing in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers sparkled and conversations hummed with ambition. It had been years since I had attended an investment summit, yet as soon as I walked in, I felt the old rhythm return, the handshakes, the quick glances of recognition, the nods of respect. The keynote speaker introduced me as a veteran voice in the field, and when I stepped up to the microphone, the applause startled me. I spoke not about profits or strategies, but about resilience, how markets rise and fall, how families falter and rebuild, how a person's worth should never be defined by how others choose to treat them. The room grew quiet, and in the silence I felt an odd warmth, as though my story carried weight beyond numbers on a page. Later that evening, as I sipped champagne and listened to a younger investor describe her first venture, I caught sight of Elaine at the edge of the room. She had come uninvited, her expression uncertain. She looked smaller in that crowd than I had ever seen her, her confidence stripped back to something raw and human. She approached slowly. "Mom," she whispered, "I wanted to see you. I needed to understand who you really are." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. For once there was no demand in her voice, no expectation of money or rescue, only curiosity, maybe even admiration. I smiled faintly. "I'm the same person I've always been. You just never looked closely enough." Her eyes glistened, and though nothing more was said, I sensed the ground shifting between us. Not healed, not yet, but tilting toward something possible. That night, back in my penthouse, I stood again at the glass wall, the city glittering below. I thought about the gate at the airport, the cruel finality of being left behind, and I thought about the gate I had walked through instead, the one that led me here to a life reclaimed. The pain had not vanished, but it had shaped me, carved away the parts of myself that had settled for less. In its place stood a woman who knew her worth. Love without respect is dependency. But love with respect, that is the legacy I intend to leave.